Hello, everyone who's already on the webinar today. I have actually included a link to download some of the documents we'll work on today, as well as these slides. I'll also drop it into the chat so that you guys can use it. Oh, except my PDF or PowerPoint's not cooperating with me. And we're also waiting on the captioner. There was an issue with her link, so we may get started just a few minutes late. And the link to download the documents is now in the chat, and I'll just go ahead and read it out loud. It is a11y.okabletech.org/downloads. Oh, I didn't get it pasted in the chat like I thought. Here you go now. All right, looks like you got it. No problem. Sorry about that. Mess up there in the first place. All right. Hello, everyone. It looks like our captioner is online, so hopefully she's getting everything connected. While we're kind of waiting to get started, I'm going to see if a few more people hop on. I wanted to repeat that there are some documents to download that we'll be working through today. The download for those is located at a11y.okabletech.org/downloads. And I will paste it in the chat again for those of you who've popped on since I last put in the chat. Found a weird Zoom quirk. It doesn't show the chat from before you logged on to the webinar, so it's kind of interesting. All right, so that's in the chat. Go ahead and go download those documents if you would like to work alongside me. You definitely don't have to. You can just watch and get the same amount of information out of this. All right, so I'll just give it another minute to see who hops on, and then we'll get started. All right, so I'll repeat one more time since a few more people have logged on. We have some documents we can download today to follow along. Those are located at a11y.okabletech.org/downloads. And I see some questions, cart URL available. They should be available in Zoom if you find the toolbar and select the CC button. They should be available that way. And I believe that the captions will be included in any YouTube recording that we put out, yes. So should be covered. Okay, good questions right off the start. So hopefully those are good answers, and we'll kind of go ahead and jump in. So I want to thank you guys for sticking with me all the way to session 4 of this PDF accessibility series sponsored by AT3 Center. And I want to thank AT3 Center for allowing me to present this. It's been a lot of fun getting to present this and work through all of these unique PDF issues with you all. Okay. Of course, every time I try to start my PowerPoint, it won't change for me. So, all right, here we go. So I want to just do a really quick recap to kind of cover, or to talk about what we've covered so far, and kind of remind you how this stuff that we're talking about today might integrate with what we've done so far. But so far we've gotten set up to use Adobe Acrobat Pro DC's accessibility features, some of which we set up in the first video and are just now getting around to using. We have learned to move and edit tags so that you can actually get any text or content, etc., that's on your document available to assistive technology. We've added learned to add alt text to images and figures. We've used the reading order tool to tag content, and that might come into play in the second document that we work in today. And we've also, as of last session, done some tagging of lists and tables and worked with a table editor for complex tables. So all of these things that we've done will come into play and help you out when we're thinking about adding this last layer, which is accessible forms. All right, so in session 2, we had actually gone over kind of a workflow as we were going through how to tag things and so on and so forth. So I just wanted to kind of remind you that that's there. We're going to be adding to that today. So the steps kind of roughly right now, as I have them, are consider things that can't be fixed in Acrobat as the first step. If it's a scanned document, run optical character recognition, which is OCR for short. If there aren't any tags, that's step 3, adding tags. And then step 4 is kind of just a lumping in of editing of your tags. So marking objects that don't need to be part of the tag tree as artifacts, arranging the tag tree to match the visual structure, that's reading order, adding alt text to anything that is visual, and then making sure the links are in the tag tree as well. All right, so when thinking about form fields, we have a couple of different options. So I'll show you 2 different kinds of workflows that we can think about. One option that is to add your form fields before you do any tagging. So the reason being, it's often actually easier to add the form fields and then auto tag the document, just because the tags for the form fields will be included as you do the auto tag. So there's a weird quirk in Adobe Acrobat that doesn't actually create a tag for a form field as you're adding the form fields. Hopefully in the future they fix that, but right now it's a separate process unless you're letting that auto tag feature go. So what the workflow would look like if you chose this option, it's going to go after the running the OCR if it's a scanned document. So that's typically going to be almost the first thing you do if you get a form that you, or sorry, a document that you know is pretty good on color contrast, or those things that we can't fix when it comes to Acrobat. So that would be step 3. And then you would go in and add your document tags using either a manual process or let it actually add the tags through the auto tag feature. The other alternative that we have is to add the form fields after the tagging is already done. So this can be a good way of doing things if you have a document that's already gotten a lot of or had a lot of remediation done on it. So the tags are really where they need to go already. And it actually can sort of help in certain cases, but I think those will become a little bit more clear as we go through the demonstration. But the caveat with this choice is that if you add any form fields to the document after it's already been tagged, you're going to need to make sure that you go through the separate process of adding tags. And we actually already did that process when we talked about links. So when you have a document, for instance, that didn't have a link tagged in it for some reason, if it was a scan document or something like that, because normally the links from Word come over pretty seamlessly. But for instance, if it's a scan document and it's not picking up the hyperlink, if you add a link, then you need to go back and add that tag. So this is the same exact thing for the form field. So you've already kind of done this, actually, that second step. But that's definitely something you have to consider, that they need to be added kind of as a separate step. So if we're to look at our workflow again, using this alternative of adding the form fields after the document's been tagged, it's going to go just after number 3, after adding tags if there are none. And so in this case, just for simplification purposes, I didn't kind of adjust this workflow. I left that add tags in there, even though we're kind of assuming in this case the tags are there and they're already remediated and accurate. All right. And again, you'll have these slides so you can refer back to that. And hopefully we'll get those shared after that, after this is complete. Okay, so before we kind of dive in, I wanted to kind of set the framework for you guys. So there are 3 things that we really need to consider when we think about form fields, and I'm calling them the Form Field Necessities. So the first thing is that we need to give them a label. So those of you who are familiar with HTML accessibility, web accessibility, this should be a familiar concept. So there's just a plain text field where you just type in your first name, for instance. So that first name label is out to the side of that form field. So in HTML, you can programmatically associate those 2 things to make it where the assistive technology will pick up on that label as the form is being navigated using a tab key, for instance. So in PDFs, we can do the same sort of thing. It's just not associated the same way. So unfortunately, it won't look quite the same, but we actually add that label that's going to be used by assistive technology using the tooltip. So the tooltip is the important part to think about here. And then we also have tab order. Tab order is kind of similar to reading order, except, this is the interactive sort of piece of a form, right? You can actually tab through using your keyboard, and this is how a lot of assistive technology users will navigate the form. And you probably have already done that on a website too. If you're just trying to kind of quickly get from one field to another, you might have just hit the tab key and not really even known you were doing it. But that's a really important thing to consider. We need to make sure that the tab order also matches the visible order, just like the reading order does. So we'll cover how to do that as well. And then last but not least is that tagging that I've already kind of mentioned, so I won't hit it too hard again, but we need to make sure any form fields that we've added to the page, placed on the page, is visible in the tag tree as well. And that's what actually makes it available to assistive technology. Some other things to point out about forms that aren't really related to the bulk of making them accessible. Well, I guess that's debatable, but anyway, some things to do to help anybody filling out your form give you good data. First of all, it's a good idea to provide any instructions up front so that individuals know how to actually fill out your form. When it comes to a PDF form, it's often best to put those instructions above any of your form fields, because as a screen reader navigates through, it can actually go into a forms mode. And what will happen in those cases is that any text that's just, like I said, in a label or above that isn't necessarily going to be as easily gotten back to. So it's kind of good to provide that ahead of time while someone is still in that reading mode, so that they know kind of how to fill out this form if there's anything that's really important. Another thing you can do is actually place instructions in your tooltip. So this is especially important if you have anything that needs a specific format, like a date. So I've included in my slides here an example of month, or mm/dd/yy, so indicating that you want a 2-digit month, date, and year format. So that's often good to put in that tooltip so that it's going to be read out loud as someone is navigating through that form fields with a screen reader or other assistive technology. The other thing you can do is really just make sure you're using the correct form fields. And there was a specific example that I had in mind, and I must have imagined it because I couldn't go back and find it. But what I kind of wanted to represent here is a choose all that apply. And we want apples, bananas, and pears to be the options. But imagine that little bullet to the left is a radio button. So radio buttons are actually only used in a case where you want a single choice rather than multiple choices to be selected. So if we were to create this in our form using radio buttons, then the individuals filling out our form will not actually be able to give us the correct information. They're going to be able to give us one option rather than many. And that goes, that radio buttons and checkboxes are a place where we see that pretty often, but that can be just about anything. You know, if it's a paragraph that you need, try to avoid putting it in a really small text box. So just really think about how this is going to be used and what data you need out of it, and just build the form around that. So those also, you know, while they're not necessarily specific compliance related things, they do help make your form easier to use and just more accessible in general. One last thing I'll kind of leave you with before we move into the demonstration portion is the question of really, does it need to be a PDF form? As you'll kind of see as we go through this, or any of you who are familiar with PDF forms already, there's a lot of rework that needs to happen if anything needs to be changed in this form. So if you, for instance, have someone's name in the form and it needs to be changed, the process typically would be that we go back to our Word document where this PDF form originated, make the change there, convert it to a PDF, and have to add all the form fields again. So this can be pretty painful, and we really want to try to avoid that if at all possible. So if you are looking at this form and you say, okay, well, there might be some other ways I can do this. You know, I can make an HTML form in my website that it has a forms builder, or I might want to use SurveyMonkey, something like that. Those are often a lot easier to edit. Of course, if you make that choice, you need to make sure whatever platform you're using does provide an accessible HTML form. But I'll stick with what I originally said. They typically are a lot easier to correct and change than a PDF form. So particularly forms that just change all the time, a PDF form might not be the best option for it. And I'll also just throw this in here. My contact information is going to be included at the end of this webinar, and it's also in the slide deck. But you can always contact us if you need help. If you figured out a PDF form isn't necessarily the right format, you know, feel free to ask questions about the platform you may be using. So I'll just throw that out there. Don't feel like you're alone in that choice. Okay, so now we'll kind of get into the meat of the topic today. So we're going to add form fields to our document using two different methods. The first is that auto detect feature I was talking about, and you can find that, and it looks a little different in both of these, but you can find that either in the accessibility tool or the prepare form tool. And the other way you can do, or you can add form fields, is to manually do so by using the prepare form toolbar, where you just kind of drag and drop the form fields to where you need them to be placed on the page. And yep, move over to our demo. took this form that's from, I think it's one of the built-in Microsoft forms, so it's very generic. It was actually built in Word using tables. So that would be a topic for another time, I suppose, but I made 2 versions of this form. So this first one actually doesn't have any tags. So you'll look in the tag tree. If you look in the tag tree, you'll see that this one doesn't have any tags. That's the one we'll be working with first. And then second of all, I created another version where I just tagged it and took everything out of the table structure so that it was more accurately representing what was on the page. Okay, but like I said, we'll start here. And so thinking back to that workflow I talked about, what we're starting with is adding the form fields before we do anything with the tags. So we'll see how that looks. And we may not get through all of this form, but I'll just make sure and hit the main concepts before we move over into the second form and look at what happens if we add form fields to an already tagged PDF. All right, and I'll take a pause here just to make sure there aren't any questions. I've seen some things popping up in the chat. Okay, looks like. All right, so I've got a question so far on Google Docs versus Word forms. So yeah, let's revisit that at the end, Susan. I think that's a great question, and I'll try to save some time at the end to kind of cover that. That's a big question for sure. Okay, so our first step when we have this untagged PDF form that we want to make a fillable PDF is to add those form fields. So I have my toolbar open on the right-hand side, and we're first going to look into our accessibility tool. And we have a few options in there like we're hopefully used to by now, but the one we're looking for is identify form fields. So if we click that, and I'm not actually going to do it right now because I want to show you the other way too, and once you do it, it's kind of stuck. But that's what you're looking for if you go this route, is that identify form fields. We can also go to the Prepare Form tool. It's over in the right-hand side as well. And this will look a little bit different. So when you hit the Prepare Form tool button, it actually pops up a screen that's asking you which file you want to work on or make into a form. You can also open a different form from here, but typically if you have the file open already, it will just kind of keep that selection, and that's the file you're going to make into a form. According to Adobe, there is still a bug in this option for this document requires signature. So I have been told to keep this unchecked. The form will actually allow signatures, and those are accessible, but for some reason this button messes things up. So just go ahead and leave that unchecked. And the next thing we're looking for on this page is that form field auto detection is on. If you turn this off, then it's not going to auto tag any of those form fields. It's gonna just kind of leave you with a blank form and open the Prepare Form tool for you. But you can leave that on, and that'll be what auto tags as many form fields as it possibly can find given the structure of the document. All right, so we'll go ahead and click Start. And when we did that, a lot's changed on our form. We had a lot of form fields that it auto-detected. And the reason being, and I'll kind of just talk through this really briefly, is that Word document had underlines in the table. So anywhere there was an underline, well, not everywhere, but most of the places it had an underline, it was actually figuring out that that should be a form field. So it caught a lot of the form fields in this document. As we kind of scroll down though, we'll notice that it didn't get the checkboxes that are part of the I would like my donation applied towards section. And it missed this line for who to make checks payable to, basically. So it got a lot of things done for us. But one other thing I wanted to point out is and I see this a lot coming from Word. So any document that is made into a PDF form, I guess it's harder to make a circle in Word. I'm not really sure. I'm not really ever tried to do it myself. I don't work in PDF forms besides just this remediation stuff too often. But this was actually a square. So if since I'm not zoomed in enough, I couldn't catch that. If I move that off, you'll see that was a square in the Word document. So this auto tagging did actually figure out that was a square and added a checkbox for it. So we know, though, this question is actually for whether or not to keep the donation confidential. So the label for this says, please keep my donation confidential, and it's got a yes or no option. So this is one of those situations where we only want them to select one option. So we're going to need to change that to a radio button group. So we'll get to that here in a little while. But I just wanted to point out that it may have picked those up, but we need to make sure they are the correct form field type. All right, so let's go back up to the top, and we'll just kind of start going through these one by one. So we can actually visibly see that the name for this first form field, which is just a text box for first name, has actually been given a name of first name. And I do want to point out what's displayed on the form field itself is the name, not the tooltip. To see the tooltip, we're going to need to go into the properties. So you can do that a couple of ways. First off is a right click on the field that you want to get the properties for, and then you click properties. I'm going to move this somewhere out of the way so we can kind of see a little better. So when we open our properties, we'll see that the name is first name, like is displayed on the field itself. And then we have the tooltip. So again, that tooltip is really the important part here. That name is for us. It's kind of so that we know what the form field is for. Often they are the same though. There's really no reason to name them any differently. But the tooltip here is what's going to get read by a screen reader. So that's the important part. All right, so it looks like we're covered on that one. It figured out that there was a text box and that it was a first name text box, and it gave it the name of that and the tooltip a name of first name. So we're covered there. I feel like I'm being really redundant and saying name a lot, but there you go. All right, so that one's good. That one actually did everything we needed it to, so we can move on to the next one. If we leave our properties box open, we can actually just click down into the next box, which is for last name. Again, that was just, it made it a regular text box, so we're good to go there. And it gave it a name of last name and a tooltip of last name. So again, that one's good. Just kind of going down the line. We have address next. It did the same thing, gave it a name and tooltip of address. So that one is ready to go. And same thing for city, state, zip. And the next one we get to is home phone. So let me move this back out of the way. You may notice that it did something a little strange with this one. It said home phone 1, or gave the name of this text field a name of home phone 1. And they gave it a tooltip of home phone 1 in brackets, actually. And if, like, you may be wondering why it did that, and the reason why is it actually thought that email was a home phone 2 rather than an email. So I'm not really sure why it didn't catch that email text and put that in there, but it's not perfect, clearly. All right, so we can actually just change this. We can make this home phone and take off the 1. I also want to point out a weird quirk here. There were some times when I felt like I was missing something because it wouldn't save my changes. So there is a weird quirk in Adobe where if you make a change, you can't necessarily go onto the properties of another text box or other form field at this point. You kind of need to click out of that box into the other one, and then it'll actually save your changes. So my weird trick is to just kind of click between these a couple times, and I know everything's saved on those properties. It's a little bit weird, but I've saved myself a little bit of trouble doing that. All right, so then we go to cell phone, and that one is good with the name of cell phone and tooltip of cell phone. And then we'll go to email, and this one clearly got it wrong, so we just need to change that to email and email, and I'll do my little trick. So now they're both saved, we're good to go. Then it gets a little more fun as we kind of get through to the more complex part of this form. The next thing that we have is a label of enclosed is my tax deductible gift of blank. So it actually didn't catch any of that text. It left the name and tooltip as undefined. So we're going to go ahead and change that. And what we're looking to add here is, and the name can be just gift amount. Seems like what it is to me. And for the tooltip, we can either type out the label name, so enclosed is my tax deductible gift of, or we could also put in there enter amounts of tax deductible gift. So either one of those is going to be descriptive enough to let a user know what this form field is for. So we'll just go with what's on the page. Enclosed is my tax deductible gift of, and again, I'm going to do my little trick. Get those things saved, and that one is now good to go. So the next part of our form is it's the portion that has a checkbox that is supposed to be checked when you have somebody or you're going to define what where you'd like your donation applied. I'm not really sure how they why they chose to do it this way in this case, but again, it's kind of an example, and we see this kind of thing happen all the time. So it's kind of a good example. But in this case, we see the checkboxes did not get any form fields added to them, so we need to go ahead and do that manually. And I'll just do, for the sake of time, a couple of these. So in our toolbar, and this is how you're adding any of your fields manually. By the way, they're all going to be located up here in that Prepare Form toolbar. So we're going to look for the checkbox option, and that's what we will add. So let's click on that, and once we click it, it becomes active, and we can drag and drop our checkbox to where it needs to go. And let's go ahead and do another one. We'll just do 3. All right, so once we have those on there, you know, I'm not necessarily too worried given the fact that this is a demonstration of how this looks, but I do want to point out that you can sort of quickly align these things, these form fields, so that you don't just sit there and try to get them aligned. If you select them all, and this is kind of like with the table editor, if you ever have that happen to you, by the way, and goes into that little edit mode, you can just click on any of the form fields and it'll come back to the forms editing options. So that's a little quick tip there. But you actually just select, draw a box around, click and hold all of the check boxes that you wanted to align, and in the Prepare Form tool, you should see the align and center and distribute match size option. So there are some tools to kind of help you do this stuff more quickly. So we're going to align vertically, and that seems fine to me. So that got that in line pretty quickly. So that's just a more of a design feature there. All right, so now we're going to work on these check boxes. So what happened here, and I haven't really paid too much attention to this fields box over here, but this is where we're going to start thinking about tab order. So these checkboxes actually got added to the end of this list. So this is where that tab order idea comes into play. These are actually going to be read out of order. They're going to be read after this checkbox that's down, or these radio buttons that are down here. Okay, so we'll need to drag and drop those to move them, but we'll cover that here in a second. All right, let's first focus on getting them named properly. So you can kind of navigate through these just like you did with the form fields on the page itself. You can get to the properties here the same way. So we are going to come up with a good name for these checkboxes. So I would say I'm going to call that checkbox donation 1. And whoops, not sure what happened there. So I'm back on my donation 1, and let's say this tooltip should be check. And I'm kind of, with checkboxes, I think it's important to kind of give the action of what it's meant to do. So in this case, check to add donation. So now we have a tooltip of check to add donation 1. And then the next thing would be to kind of edit what this, the box following it would kind of say. So let's rename these to be a little more, let's go with donation 1 name. This one's actually kind of a good example of something that's kind of difficult to name. So I'm not sure I'm doing the best job here on the fly, but the idea again is to really make sure that you are helping a user with that tooltip know what they're supposed to put in that box. So in this case, for the fill in the blank box next to the first donation checkbox, we'll say enter donation 1 name. We'll make sure that saves, and we'll click close. So that's kind of how we would work through these checkboxes. So to get these in the correct order, we can actually just drag and drop where they need to go. So that checkbox is before the fill in the blank for that donation name. So I'm going to drag donation 1, our checkbox, up to above donation 1 name. So this works very similarly to the tag tree. And now I'll just kind of show you what that looks like from the top. So we see first name is first in our order, last name next, address next, city, state, zip, and then we see cell phone actually has come next. So again, we're kind of looking at that visual order on the page, and we realize that home phone actually needs to come first. So we'll again just drag and drop up to cell phone, home phone above cell phone. And then comes email, and then gift amount, and then donation 1, and then donation 1 name. Okay, so I'm actually going to pause here. I see a few Q&As, and then we'll kind of finish up the rest of this form. And let's see, our first question is, does it have to be done with the Acrobat Pro DC? As long as you have a version of Adobe Acrobat Pro, you can make a form accessible. But the DC version, which is just the most current version, it's the new subscription model that that Adobe went to a few years back. It's going to provide you the most seamless experience and any new accessibility features that they've added since those older versions. But no, you don't have to use DC. You do have to add Adobe Acrobat Pro though. All right, another question is, would these forms function correctly if it's a downloadable form versus an inline web form? So most browsers at this point, I think, and I hope I'm not wrong about this, do kind of treat them the same way. So as long as it's a fillable form, it can be filled out either in like a Chrome web browser or in the Adobe Reader version that your individual is filling out the form may have. So it should work the same way. The submit buttons, I think, are a little bit questionable. So I think sometimes the browsers don't necessarily allow you to submit. So that's where it can get a little bit hairy. All right. Next question, will there be, will the person be able to read the "I would like my donation to go to" text? That's a great question. So I was mentioning earlier that there are two screen reader modes. There's a reading mode and a forms mode. So in this case, if someone's actually navigating through the form fields using that tab key, typically they're going to be in a forms mode. So they would actually have to go back into the reading mode, so completely switch which mode their screen reader is using to read that text that says, "I would like my donation applied toward." And that's why, and I'm really glad you asked that question because I really don't think I made that connection super well. That's why it's really important to put in that tooltip, sort of what the action is, like what you're intending for the person to put into that box, so that that label isn't something they have to go back and get out of that forms mode to go read. This makes it a little more seamless and easier to navigate through. All right, any more questions while I'm paused? Awesome. All right, looks like we're good. So we've covered a little bit about how to reorder these using the tab, the tabbing order, just based on the order that's actually in your prepare form tool. So I don't feel like we need to keep covering that. I would have liked to have gotten through this whole form, but there's just a lot more to cover. So let me go ahead and kind of skip these next two. Well, actually, let me do this one here. So this "please mail checks, corporate matches, and other donations payable to" needs a text box. So we would just do the same thing as we did with our check boxes and add one manually. So we're looking at that add a text field button that's in the toolbar of the prepare forms tool. So we'll drag it, oh, I need to click it first. Sorry, we'll need to drag it down to where it needs to go, resize it how we need it to be, and then we'll do the same thing we did with our check boxes and go to the properties and rename this. So this one would be maybe payable to, could be a good name for it. And then I would say the text that's right here, and you can actually, if you go into this mode, you can actually copy paste, but just be careful about moving anything. We'll just copy that exact label in there because that seems like it's a pretty descriptive, actionable sort of description for the tooltip. Then we'll click close. And again, you need to make sure and notice where that text box went, and would need to drag that up to below the check boxes. So we'll put it right here where it should go after we had, of course, gotten through the rest of those donation name boxes and things like that. All right, so the last thing I wanted to point out on this form is the, whoops, please keep my donations confidential. So I was actually wrong when I pointed this out earlier. Somehow Adobe was smart enough to figure out that these actually need to be radio buttons. My guess it was actually, my guess is it was actually reading yes or no and knows that that should be a radio grouping instead of a checkbox. So it went ahead and did that for us. Let's go into the properties and kind of look at what this looks like. And right now, let me expand this out a little bit. If I can get the thing to show. Oh, it's not going to cooperate with me right now. So I'm sorry that's a little small. It looks like I can't get it to resize for me. But if we go into our properties, you'll notice I'm actually kind of on the grouping name. So that's a big differentiation between checkboxes and radio buttons just right here. You need to treat them a little differently in Adobe as well. So they do need a group name, and that group name is going to be what that label is. So you know that that's actually going to be what is read out each time somebody encounters one of these radio buttons. So that's what that group name allows it to do. So if I am actually tabbing through here, listening to this with a screen reader, and I get to the yes radio button, it's going to say, please keep donation confidential, yes, and then they'll know whether to check or go on to the next one. So another thing you can do to kind of make this look more like a radio button, because right now it's a square, if you go over into your Appearance tab in the Properties section, you can actually change this. Well, you're supposed to see, of course, it always makes me, yeah, it's in Options. It's actually not in Appearance. It should be in Appearance, but I don't think that's always the most logical choice. Okay, so if you change your button style to circle, then you can actually make them look more like radio buttons too. All right. The other thing you need to do is actually in the, yeah, let's click down to our yes and no buttons. So that grouping doesn't need anything in this radio button choice because it is just serving as a grouping for the two buttons that actually correspond to that label. But if we click on yes, that field's there. We leave the tooltip and the name the way they are because they're defined by that group name. And we go over to Options, and this is where we put our choice. So that needs to say yes for that yes option and no for the other. And that's kind of the gist of radio buttons. All right, it looks like I have a question. So the first question I see is, if it's a lengthy document, will the screen reader switch between forms mode and reading mode? It's kind of a conscious choice. I believe once you, if you're opening a document and you're using a screen reader, as you're navigating through it, it's actually going to be in reading mode to start off with. When you tab into that first form field, it's going to switch to forms mode. So then the user has to make a conscious choice to actually get it back to reading mode, no matter the size of the document. So somebody may actually just be in reading mode once when they're encountering the document first, opening it, and then going into forms mode and finishing the rest of it out. Especially if you've built the form well, then that means they don't need to go back into reading mode to see any extra information that you may not have put in your labels in those tooltips for those form fields. But good question. All right, and how did I get it to say group name? So if I go back into, this one was kind of created for me, Christina. So if I go into my properties, it's just going to be there. So let me go ahead and add a new radio grouping just so you can kind of see what that looks like. All right, so click on the first one, and you can see after I added those two radio buttons in my little listing of all the form fields, you can see it's already starting to group those dynamically. I didn't have to do anything. So that's where you can go in and change the name to whatever it's supposed to be. And of course, that's going to be corresponding to whatever your label is. So in this case, it would have been, please keep my donation confidential. Because that's, again, what we want to be read out every time someone encounters one of those drop-down, or sorry, radio buttons. And this is also where we can change that button style. But yeah, that's kind of how it would look if you're creating a new radio button grouping. Good questions. Okay. We have only about 12 minutes left, so I'm going to go briefly show you this other document. this shouldn't take as much time as the rest of it. That was the, I'm leaving out an important part. So back to this document, I lied. Let me go back here. All right, so now that we have our form fields pretty much done, this is when we wanted to go in and add our tags and see what the auto tagging feature does. So if we go into our accessibility tab tool, we can click auto tag document, and then we'll just see what it gives us. It may be great, it may not be great. So it looks like it picked up this figure for some reason. It's actually got the text kind of within that figure. So we need to do a little work to get that text out and into a heading 1 for this case. It looks like it picked up on first name and put that all in a paragraph. And so as we're going through these, I just kind of want you to pay attention to what's being highlighted. So right now on our paragraph tag, the second one in the tag tree, it's highlighting first name and the corresponding form field. So if we open up that paragraph, we'll see that that text is in there, so that that container now has that content itself of first name plus the form fields. And this is what a form field tag should look like. It's got a form tag as the parent tag, and then this is actually, and again, this is the same thing as you saw with links. It's got this OBJR, which stands for object reference. So that is just like this first name is the content itself. That first name OBJR is the form field itself. And then you nest it under that form tag so that assistive technology knows what type of thing that thing is. So hopefully that doesn't get too confusing there. But this is an appropriate nesting because this all technically is one paragraph. And this is kind of how it should look. So it looks like, if we kind of go down through the rest of this form, it looks like it did a pretty good job until it got to this city, state, zip, home phone, and cell phone. And the reason that happened probably is because we have two things in one line. So this kind of goes to illustrate the more simple your forms are, the more easy of a time you're going to have with any tagging that you do, with any auto tagging especially. So if we were to kind of open those up, we'll see kind of what it left us with. So we have a paragraph span that has a city, state, zip text in it, that content. And then we have a form tag that's been given all three of those form fields within it. So just really quickly, let me split this one out so you can kind of see what that looks like. So what we're missing is two form tags. And then we can actually just use these paragraph tags, span tags, and change them to paragraphs, and that'll help us kind of split things out. So I want to go up to my parent container, that paragraph tag that's we see is highlighting all of that content. Click new tag, and we're going to make these form. And it's going to close all that down, but that's okay. We'll open it back up. So we need two of those. And then what I'm going to do is start just moving things where they need to go. So that city, state, zip is the first one, so we'll leave it where it is. But let's move the home phone out to that second form tag, that cell phone out to that third form tag. And then beyond that, we need to move home and cell phone somewhere else. So what I'm going to actually do is move this paragraph, or move the city, state, zip out from under that paragraph span. So we're going to put it in this one that already exists. So just leave it kind of there. And then open that form tag up and make sure that's city, state, zip. We're going to drag that one up there. So now this is like we want it to look. And we just need to take these two and pull them out. So we'll, I'm just using my multiple select. So I've got those two paragraph spans selected, and I'll drag them out. And I want to make that bar sort of even to the whole tag itself instead of doing the shorter version, which is going to just put it back where it's already placed. So I want to make it that longer line, and that's going to put it underneath this paragraph tag. So now we have a little bit easier something to work with. This one is a paragraph span tag. It's home phone, so it should go second, so it's already in the right order underneath that city state zip. But let's make it a regular paragraph. And I'm going to click close. And now I'll take that home phone form and drag it underneath that one. And the same thing would be done to the cell phone. And we change that to a paragraph tag. And then we kind of close all that up. And I know I'm doing this pretty quickly, and I'm sorry. I can go back over anything that anybody has questions on. So now when I highlight those as I'm going through the document, I see city state zip is one single paragraph, home phone is one single paragraph, and cell phone is one single paragraph. So now they're split out appropriately, and we can kind of continue on with remediating those tags. So that's kind of what the whole process would sort of look like. Of course, we're not completely finishing this form just due to time, but that's sort of getting you to start to finish kind of ish. All right, so let's move over and really quickly. I've already gotten these tags they look a lot like what you just saw in that other example. I just separated everything out, and I left this one as a checkbox, just because I realized I didn't have a radio button too late in the example I had. But anyway, so that's a little bit different in this form. But what we want to do in this case is first, since this document is tagged like we want it, we want to start adding our form fields, and then we're going to have to add our form field tags after. But in this case, we can try to see what the the auto field recognition is going to do. It may do a great job, it may not. So let's start with the prepare form in this case, and our settings stay the same, so we don't have to change those. We'll click start, and it looks like it did the exact same thing. So in the case of this form, starting with no tags and starting with tags actually gave us some sort of the same results when it came to the auto form field recognition. So you're going to see that be pretty consistent. If it can pick up on a form field, it's going to, whether or not there are already tags there. Anyway, so you've kind of already seen what the end result should look like. So we'll just pretend that this form is all done and everything is in there nice and neat. But what we'll do is add these tags to the tag tree. So if I open up, for instance, so I've got my heading 1 of cash donation form. Whoops. And I've got that second paragraph, second tag in the tag tree, which is that paragraph that contains first name, that text on the page. If I open that up, you'll see, even though we have our form fields in there now, what's missing is that form tag itself. So we need to add that. And again, this is just like we did with links, so this is going to look really familiar, hopefully. So what I'm going to do is right-click on this paragraph tag and click Find Tag from, I'm sorry, not Find Tag from Selection, just the Find button. And when I do that, I actually want to look for unmarked annotations. So with links, you'd be looking for unmarked links. So this is the only difference. You're looking for unmarked annotations. And we're going to click, you can either leave it on search page or click search documents. Since this is one page, it's going to be the same result either way. We'll click find. And when I clicked find that first time, now that first name button, first name text field, sorry, is highlighted. And what we'll do is click tag element. And this actually put that element inside of that paragraph. So that's something to kind of consider if you are doing this in bulk. So what you could do, and well, I'll give you two options. Just let me finish this out. So remember what we saw before, though. There's something missing, right? We need that form tag that this object reference for that first name field goes into. So under this paragraph tag now, we're going to right click, click new tag, and it's already on the type of form. So we'll click OK. And I'll drag that where it needs to go underneath first name, because it is announced after first name, and in the order it technically is below first name or next to. So then we'll drag first name OBJR into that form tag, and now our paragraph is complete. It contains the tag for the label itself, and it contains that form tag that has that form field object reference in it. So I told you I'd give you a couple of options, and I know I'm coming up here on time, but I'm happy to stay after if any of you have questions, of course. All right, so the rest of these would need to be added as well, all of these tags for the rest of the form fields on the page. So you could go into each paragraph and click Find, and then change it to unmarked annotations, and click Tag Element. So it's going to put it where you want it to go. But if you like, I like to batch activities, and if any of you are like that, this might be something that would be easier for you. But you can actually go up to the first tag in your tag tree, or the tags root, either one, and click Find. And we'll move to unmarked annotations. We'll leave it on search page, click Find. So it's going to find address. We'll click Tag, make it a type of form. You'll see it closed my tag tree with that section in there, but that's totally fine. Again, we can get that back open later. So next it found city, state, zip. So let's click Tag, make it a form, and it's been added. So this is a little more efficient in terms of getting all of them marked, and you may have also noticed a difference as we were doing this, but it actually puts it in a form tag for you. So doing it this way and kind of getting them all out from under, or instead of putting them directly within that paragraph tag that they go with, it kind of eliminates one step for you. So it adds that parent form tag for you. The other alternative that you could do, if you like that first option better, you can go ahead and within each of these paragraphs create a form tag, and then go ahead and do that find on that form tag, and it'll just place it directly in there. So there are a few different options for you, and hopefully that's not throwing too many things at you. But again, I kind of like this method. I can get all the form fields out and ready to be moved where they need to go, and then I'll actually just start kind of opening up my tags to find where, where they need to go, and I'll just use that cut and paste child option that we talked about in the second session and get those where they need to be placed. Okay, so I am a minute over, but that concludes what I had to show you, and I'm sorry it took so long. Forms are one of the more time-intensive things that you can do in Adobe Acrobat, but they are definitely doable. It just takes a little practice, just like everything else that we've talked about. And anyway, I'll open it up to questions now, and thank you guys so much for your attention. And these will be posted. We have been recording, and it should be posted on the same website we've been posting them, and I think Jamie has put them into, or put that link in the chat. If not, I can do that. I've got a comment. Yeah, I can't believe how labor intensive this still is. Yeah. I think they're really working on trying to make this a little more easy to do, but it's just going to take a little bit. Again, they're kind of building on architecture of the product that was already out there years ago, so they're working on it. All right, any more questions? Oh, I see one in the Q&A. Are there any other PDF programs that you would suggest for using for creating forms more easily? I'm not actually very familiar, I'll be honest, with any other products that create PDF forms. I know there are some out there, like Foxit, for instance, but we don't typically use that. We just typically stay within Adobe products. So I unfortunately don't have anything to recommend for that. And yes, thank you. Jamie did put in the YouTube channel link. So all of the videos from this series are posted on that YouTube channel. guess if there are no more questions, I really appreciate everything. If you guys have any questions, oh, and I forgot to go back to my slide. I always forget that. I get so wrapped up. I put in 2 resources. WebAIM has a great article on PDF forms. If you like to go look at that, it kind of can give you some instructions on some of the stuff I displayed or demonstrated. And then Adobe has some accessibility guides that are kind of hard to find, but they're there. I do like WebAIM's a little better, just being honest. And then the recordings are on the YouTube page, and I've included the other page in my slides. And here's my email address. So it's lissa.prince@okstate.edu. And let's see. I have another question. All right, can you explain again how you got to group name? Sure, no problem. Let me go back to my documents here. So on our yes, no checkboxes, that's what we're looking at. So let's go to prepare form, and I'm going to look through my field names here in my prepare form tool. And the group name itself is that it looks like a little grouping. You can actually see it's kind of a radio checkbox grouping. So that's where the group actually is held and contained. So when you create a new radio button group, this will automatically be created, and you can always go back to it within this menu. All right, hope that answered your question. Since you did it in the Q&A, if you want to put it in the chat, if I explain that enough, I'd be happy for the feedback. All right, and while you're, okay, great. So then I've got the question again of just Google Forms versus Word versus PDF. Google Forms is one of those HTML solutions I was mentioning. Now, I will admit we haven't done a full accessibility test on it, but I do know that a lot of people within reputable groups such as Knowbility do use Google Forms for a form solution. So while it may not be 100% accessible in terms of web accessibility, it can still get you pretty far. So I think that that's a good option to use in lieu of a PDF form. Word forms can be made accessible, but the caveat there is that you have to use the legacy form fields. And that could be a whole other webinar to talk about Word forms as well. We don't necessarily use those very often. I still think PDF provides a better experience overall, just because of that. The nature of PDFs is not, they're not editable like Word documents are. And there are ways you can lock the Word documents, but I think for accessibility, I'd still go with a PDF form over a Word form. But I think one of the things that you might be asking and just not saying is if you can add form fields in Word and they translate over, and that is definitely a no. So anything you do in Word and add form fields to, you'd have to redo in a PDF. They don't really translate. And let me go back to that question in the chat and just make sure I'm not missing it. Yeah, so I would definitely stick with Adobe Forms over Word Forms for accessibility. But other than that, if you look at any HTML solutions like Google Forms, those are typically the ones that are going to be more easily editable than going through all of this and adding those form fields and doing all this time-intensive work. And if that didn't answer your question, please let me know. Awesome. Well, again, thank you guys so much. If you have any questions after this, just feel free to let me know. I'm happy to get answers. I love talking about this stuff clearly, so I'm happy to get your questions and answer them if I can. And thank you guys so much. I'll close out the room now. Oh, Adi, I see. We've got a question about forms in WordPress. So there are a lot of tools in WordPress that can be used to make forms. It really depends on which plugin your organization has chosen to use for those forms. I'd be happy to, and I know you have my email from previous communications, so if you'd like to email me with a specific form, I can kind of go check it out and see what it looks like for you. Just as a for instance, like Caldera Forms is decent. Gravity Forms is pretty good too, but like I said, it just really depends on the plugins. There are tons and tons of WordPress plugins, and not a lot of them actually deal properly with accessibility. Okay, well, it looks like everyone's logging off, so I really will close the room. And again, thank you one last time. I appreciate it.